Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast, episode 29, Site Builders and Webflow. I'm your host, Matt Lawrence, and I'm joined again by my co-host, Mike Karan. What have you been up to this week, Mike?
Yeah, Matt. So this week has been ridiculously busy with client work. Same with the last week, actually. So I've been just trying to kind of keep my head above water, trying to get everything done, organizing, really working on my productivity game. That's kind of the theme of the last couple of weeks. I've been trying to, use all my productivity tools that are at my disposal so I can get everything done and I don't forget things, just because it's starting to become kind of like an overwhelming amount of stuff. So I need to make sure that everything's kind of organized. Unfortunately, some stuff for HTML things have fallen down the priority list. But I'm hoping that will be picked up at some point in the future soon. Obviously, we're still going to do the podcast. I still have to make time for that, but that's okay. Yeah. Other than that, though, that's about it. What about you, Matt?
So same kind of thing. So been doing quite a bit of client work. We kind of have business coming in on all fronts. You work with like kind of a long-term client. You work with Azar, which has been on the show before. So you've been working with him over the past couple of weeks, quite a bit actually. And then I've been working with one of our other long-term clients on on the small business side. So that's been a whole thing as well. However, I have been looking at, because they finally added some new documentation for our PWA. So if you're new to the show, we did a PWA during a code challenge. It's called No BS News for Reddit. You can check it out right now. It's kind of in a demo form, and it's just kind of been sitting there because we just kind of did it to the code challenge standard, did a little bit of tweaks, and then that was it. So now there's a new way to apply, or I guess I don't know if it's apply, but it's a new way to take a PWA and actually put it in the Google Play Store. So they added this new method a little while ago, and then as of last week, they actually updated the documentation. So I was looking at that late last night, and so I'm thinking that you need Android Studio, and there's a few steps you have to go through. So I'm thinking I'm gonna try that at some point soon, and actually try to get that thing onto the Google Play Store, because I think that's where it's gonna hit its main market, and because it needs that discovery feed. So I think I'm going to be trying that out relatively soon, see how that goes, and I'll probably be commenting on Twitter or something, as I usually do when I'm working on stuff like that. However, let's kind of dive into this episode. So this episode, just as a brief introduction, is going to be covering, obviously, as the title suggests, site builders and Webflow. So more specifically, Mike will be talking about, kind of the general ideology and ideas and stuff like that behind site builders, when you should use them, what they are, etc., etc. And then I'm going to be diving into Webflow, because I have been personally diving into Webflow quite a bit recently. We have a client who's a big fan of Webflow, and so we've been working with him and making a couple projects with him, working on almost every aspect of Webflow, minus a few features here and there, which we'll mention in the actual segment. So the breakdown today is rather simple. So segment number 1 is site builders, and Mike will be talking to you about that. And segment number 2 is going to be Webflow overview, and it's quite lengthy because there's a couple of sort of subsections in there, and I'll be discussing that. And then of course we have our recurring weekly segment, web news, which is the cookie law. So I'm going to toss it over to Mike, and he'll dive into segment number 1 here.
All right, so segment number 1, site builders. So there's many reasons out there to use a site builder. Maybe not for the web developer, but I'm just going to talk about some of the reasons and some of the people that should be using them, as well as some of the people that shouldn't. That's going to be kind of what the segment's going to be about for the most part. And these reasons can really range anywhere from convenience aspects to the pricing aspect of web development. And I think it's also fairly important for a web developer, even though they're not going to be the ones that are going to be using the typical site builders. The keyword here is typical, because we'll be talking about Webflow, which is kind of a hybrid. But I think it's at least important for the web developer to be familiar with the reasons for clients to use site builders, and then the downfalls of using the site builder. So when they're in that situation where they have to explain to a client that no, a site builder won't work for you for this project, it's coming from a place of knowledge and truth, and not from a place of you trying to get work, and that's it. So the first thing to get out of the way, some customers will absolutely benefit from a site builder. over a custom website. So it's like, it's not all customer. You're not going to be able to get all the customers out there. The ones that approach you sometimes you'll have to suggest something like a site builder to them, because in a situation where a customer, for instance, people that can find a good template, so they come with you from a good template from like a site like Wix or a site like Squarespace or a website builder like Squarespace or a website builder like WordPress has their own, and they come to you and they're like, hey, look, I found this great template from this site builder, and everything about it fits. Like, I don't have to change any of the design. I don't have to change any of the components of it. I'm just going to change some of the styling. What do you think? Like, they're coming to you for advice. What do you think I should do? Like, should I go to you? Should I go to a different web design firm, or should I use the site builder? So sometimes you're going to say, yeah, just use the site builder. Like, if they're just starting out their business, they're like one of your close friends, and they just want to get something out there on the internet. There's nothing wrong with you suggesting to use a site builder if it fits their situation. Like I said, if they don't want to change anything about the templates that they find, then they could probably get away with a site builder for an extended period of time, and that's going to save them some money, because they're not going to have to pay that upfront cost of building a website, as well as then the site builders usually charge a monthly fee, but so does hosting, so does domain names. So it's kind of a balance, but it usually will be cheaper for an upfront cost kind of situation for them to use a site builder over hosting. So that's kind of one of the reasons that you would point them towards that. Another thing is, like, if you know that the person that's going to be using the site builder likes to tinker and has the time to learn a little bit of a skill set, it's also kind of an indication that they could probably work with a site builder, because they will require tinkering no matter what, because you'll type in a paragraph and the formatting will be slightly off, so they might have to change the sizing of that paragraph or something like that. Same with the images that they upload, maybe the aspect ratio will be off, they'll have to change something. Like, it's going to require some tinkering, even though that people think that it's kind of like a plug and play situation. It's hardly ever the case. With some content, sure, it's plug and play, but what's going to happen is something that they're going to add there is not going to fit exactly like they like, and they're going to have to tinker with it. And each site builder has a different way of allowing them to tinker. So again, people that like to tinker, that have the capacity to learn how to do a little bit of web development, a little bit of visual design, maybe those are the more suited for a site builder at that time. And then maybe someone that, again, with the cost aspect of it, someone that's starting off with a bootstrap budget, they're literally just like, they're working full-time or part-time for a different job. They want to start a business on the side. They don't have any money to invest in that business at this time. They just want to see something, put something out there and see how it sticks. That happens all the time. I'm sure that you've had friends that have done it. I'm sure that you've done it before. And they don't want to invest, even $500 into a website. They just want to get something out there really quick. So those are the kinds of people, and those are the kinds of situations in my mind that warrant something like a Wix, a Squarespace, a WordPress site builder, a GoDaddy site builder. Now, I'm not going to be going over which one's the best and which one's the worst, because I don't have full-on experience with any of them, really. I've looked into Squarespace and Wix just for my client's sake. I've looked into a little bit of some e-commerce ones. They seem all right as well. Let me just there's plenty of e-commerce ones out there. There's some good ones, there's some bad ones, kind of thing. I can't really comment on the quality of them because I haven't used them, so I'm not going to. I'm just going to be talking more in the general terms of site builders. So if you ever run into these people and they ask for advice on when they should do in terms of hiring a web design firm, doing it themselves, and again, they meet those specific categories that I've just laid out above, you should definitely not hesitate to offer the advice of taking that site builder. Because sometimes offering advice that's going to take work from you seems like a detriment to yourself, but really what's going to happen, or what will happen often, is they'll go into the site builder. If it works for them, great. It might work for them for a certain amount of time, and then when they get to that point where their business is kind of taking off and they see the downfalls of them, which there are, and I'll get to them, they might come back to you and be like, well, you're the one that offered me good advice at the start. You weren't like thinking about your own bottom line. I'm going to actually give you my service now because you seem like an upfront kind of person. So I like to kind of approach customers as people that you're again, I talked about this in another episode, but it's kind of like a partnership. So you're trying to get to a product together, and if that get to a product together leads you away from the customer as well, that's okay too, because your whole goal in the web development business, or really any business, is to try to like make your customer happy, and sometimes that requires some fancy work in the back end for you, where you have to take a loss on the project or something like that, or you have to step away from it. So that's kind of where I stand on just the positives of a site builder. But to get that out of the way, there's a lot of situations where a site builder just won't cut it for a client, and most of the situations you're going to run into are probably going to be under this category, where you're going to have to explain to a client why a site builder won't work for them. So I'm going to go over a few of those with you right now. If a client brings up a site builder and then shows you a template, like I said in the first category, they show you a template, but then they're like, you know what, but I need to change X, Y, and Z on this template, like right away. I can't, like, I can't have this about section like this. I need it completely different. I can't have this contact page like this. Like, I'll need to add another contact form in there. I'll need to add, a map on this side. I need, like, when you can see that they're seeing it, they enjoy the template, but they want to change a lot in the template, a significant amount, that is automatically a red flag that a site builder just is not the right idea for them, because that's not what the site builder's for. It's not for changing a bunch of things. It's for literally taking the design that they create for you and then finessing it for your own needs. So a site builder probably won't work for this kind of client. As soon as you hear them say they want to change a bunch of stuff, I would very much try to push them in the direction of a custom website and explain to them that it's going to be much more of a hassle to change these things in a site builder, because it's very proprietary. It's very sometimes it's a very complex change, and sometimes it could break a lot of things in the process when you're changing it. So changing one thing could break 5 or 6 different things in the site, which you have to fix as well. So again, try to explain that in the best terms you can to the client in that situation. If security is a huge concern, some site builders should be avoided as well. So if your client has very sensitive data that they're trying to secure, if they have, customers coming to their site, putting in their medical data, for instance, putting in their something that you wouldn't want other people to get their hands on, some site builders might not be a good idea. So the disadvantage of site builders and the disadvantage of large platforms like site builders is the fact that when someone finds a exploit in one site that uses a site builder, they find an exploit in all the sites that use that site builder. So they could quickly attack it with a bot, quickly attack all the sites that they could find on the internet to see if they use that site builder, and try to use that exploit, which is a huge negative, obviously. If you're talking this is the difference between someone direct attacking you and someone direct attacking, millions of people. So you're much more you're much more open to an attack, obviously, if they're attacking millions and millions of people. Whereas if you were using a custom solution with a lower used CMS, or a lower like you roll your own CMS on it, there's a much less chance of that like generic attack affecting you, obviously. On the other hand, I've looked into Shopify, which is an e-commerce site builder, and I actually had a few people that I know use Shopify, and everything that I've looked at with Shopify seems that they're very serious about their security. And everyone that I've talked to about Shopify and that's used Shopify hasn't had any issues. Unlike the people that I've talked to that have used WordPress, they have come up. We've had serious issues with WordPress, obviously. That's why I bring this up. But Shopify seems to be very, very security conscious. So I don't want to say that all site builders are bad with security, but just keep that in mind when you do choose it. If the client seems to have absolutely no time to work on their website, a site builder is probably not for them. Like if you go up to the client and they say like, oh, I want a site builder, and they're like, well, do you have hours to spend manipulating your site? Like if you have, 20 hours, 30 hours, 40 hours to spend manipulating your site, then go for it, kind of thing. But if you're one of those people that hours are money for you, like if your client is making money per hour, or is putting all their time into their business and they're generating income from it, then they have to take that time out of their business and put it into creating a site, which is obviously going to be a loss. So you have to show them that there's balance to this, and if they count themselves as money per hour and they give that money to someone that already knows the job, they could do it for much less money, kind of thing. Like, so that's another consideration. If they need something very specific on their site, like an integration with the customer database, an integration with an item database, a set of decision-making systems inside of the site, like a massive workflow that a customer has to go through once they're on the site. These are also obviously situations where you want to use a custom site, because again, like when you're trying to create these things on a site builder platform, it's always going to be kind of a hassle. You're always going to be fighting proprietary things, and I just would not recommend it. And then if your customer thinks their business will grow really quickly, so if they think that they're going to get 1 million hits within like a few months, then this is a huge red flag for not using a site builder. As I'm sure Matt will point out with the negatives of something like Webflow even, there are negatives with other site builders as well where they can't handle an excessive amount of traffic. They're hosting all of your sites, right? Like, so you're not hosting your own site when you're using a site builder, they're hosting it. So they have limitations on their hosting usually. And as soon as you maybe go up to a certain level, you might not be able to reach that level. You might, like, literally your site might just crash when you reach like 500,000 hits in a day or something, and you can't scale it, is what I'm trying to say. Whereas if you go with like a very flexible hosting, like a AWS hosting or a DigitalOcean hosting or a Blue hosting, one of those, you will be able to scale. They are designed for those massive mega sites, like a site that people visit every day kind of thing. So those are the considerations that I have right now. Obviously, there's more to considerations against site builders, and again, like if you have your own, you can tweet at us and let us know. Actually, I'd love to hear. But then this really leads us into the happy medium between a traditional site builder and something that a client would manage, could manage and a custom website that a developer manages. So Webflow is kind of a site builder for the web developer, which is more the audience, obviously. It does require knowledge in CSS and layouts, but it's also very visual. So if you have a client that you think would like to sit down with you at any point and likes to do kind of a quick on-the-fly design changes and likes to see what the design changes will look like, do A/B testing with the client, like sitting right beside you, Webflow actually is a good option for that, in my opinion. I've seen Matt do some manipulations to Webflow. They happen really quick. Obviously, not all the manipulations, obviously not all the logic can happen on the fly, but a lot of like little, like, change this color over here or make this a little bit bigger, stuff like that is like, snap of the fingers and it's done kind of thing with a Webflow kind of design workflow. So that's about it. That's kind of my segue into Matt's segment. So I'm going to let it off, give it to Matt to see if he has anything to add, and then to move on to the next segment.
I think the only thing I would add is that specifically with the WordPress stuff, the WordPress issues we've had, because you mentioned those briefly, a lot of the time it's sometimes it's a bit of a user problem as well. So they will have an insecure password and they'll keep it insecure for a very long time. Sometimes it'll match their other accounts, and oftentimes it's extremely simple to actually guess, or it doesn't have, it's not secure. It doesn't have capitals, and it's like 4 characters long or something. It's usually insecure, in addition to the fact that oftentimes the actual website, so the actual WordPress installation, is old. So WordPress has its security problems, but that's because it's very large, and so it's being targeted the most. So I just want to make that clear, that if you have a client on WordPress today, and it's working for them, don't necessarily say, hey, we need to take you off right now. Just make sure that they are taking all the security steps, because WordPress, being such a large titan in the space, is just a massive target. I just want to reiterate that from Mike's points there. But I'm going to kind of dive into segment number 2 here now, which is Webflow, the Webflow overview. And I'm going to just go over the actual subsections here, because this is kind of lengthy, so I'm going to be talking for a while. So segment number 1 is the Webflow Designer, or subsection number 1 is Webflow Designer. Subsection 2 is the hosting on Webflow. Then it's CMS, then the editor, and then some limitations, and the conclusion. So it's a little bit lengthy, but there's a lot to Webflow, so let's dive right in here. So the Webflow Designer. So the Webflow Designer is the tool that is used to create the website itself. It has the more advanced tools that allow a developer to quote-unquote code visually, meaning that the majority of the controls they're using are actual CSS properties that they would be typing in manually. So for example, if you want to use Flexbox on a particular section of your website and have those flex items centered horizontally, you would add a div for the flex container, then add divs for your flex items. Then with the UI, you actually set the display property to flex and then set your alignment appropriately. So instead of actually typing in those CSS properties like you would in like a CSS style sheet, you actually just toggle the options in Webflow. So this means that a lot of the experience that you would have as like with CSS apply directly to Webflow, so you're more or less coding visually. And I have a couple other examples here. So there's a lot of other standard CSS controls that you might find. So things like classes and what they call combo classes. So you could be like .nav item and then .nav item and then also add the class .active. So that's there. There's width, and then with that, of course, max width and min width. There's height, and then max width and max height and min height. There's also padding, so you can set padding on the top, left, right, bottom, all of them, whatever. Float, you can set the floats, you can set the clear, you can set the overflow, you can set the position, the typography and fonts, which include obviously the font weight, the color, the font size, the text decoration, so whether you want to underline, strike through, whatever. You have the borders. You can set the borders, full border customizing. You just want the top border, you want it to be solid, you want it to be dotted, whatever. Transitions, etc. So there's a bunch in here. So whenever I actually start building a Webflow website, I can just quite literally, if somebody says to me, hey, I need like a custom component made up, like we've made a couple of custom tables for people, I literally do it in my head in regular CSS, and I just do it in Webflow. I'm not fighting like some sort of table component in which I'm like actually being like, oh geez, like I gotta like where's that option, like what did they name it? Because different site builders will name things according to their own workflow. They won't name it according to the standard in some cases. So this is kind of really helpful in that way. So because this is an editor, there are a bunch of non-standard CSS elements that you can add to your pages as well, of course. So things like containers that keep your content within a centered non-full width container. So a lot of that stuff is for readability, so it's not just this massive full screen website. Sort of like if you're looking at a Google Doc, the doc is like centered, like by default, it's centered and like right in the center of the screen, sort of something like that. So that's something that Webflow has in there, as well as they have like some widgets, let's say, so something where you would add like a social media profile, and then you could add maybe your at username, so on Twitter, or you can add your Facebook URL if I remember correctly, and it'll actually make a little widget, so like us here, follow us here, whatever. There's a bunch of other ones as well that come with the territory of Webflow, as they do with every site builder, but that's just a couple of prime examples that I use all the time. Also, there's another mechanic within Webflow called symbols, and symbols are a piece of a website that you use over and over again. And so if things that come to mind right away are navbar, footer, sidebar, or a widget of some kind that you make, and those all make great symbols. And symbols allow you to simply just add them to a page with a couple of clicks without having to copy paste them or remake them in some way. And what's really great about symbols is you could, let's say, have a navbar which is consistent throughout all the pages, with the exception of the active class, which it will handle with no problem. However, let's say for whatever reason you have one site or one page on your site in which the navbar is supposed to be different. It's supposed to be a different color or something for that particular page. You can add the symbol, and then you can actually detach that particular instance and then just make the change. So you don't have to make a second symbol because it's only a one-off. You just add the symbol, so most of the code's there. You disconnect it from the symbol, so that they're not all the same across the site, and then you literally just change that one, and so all the other ones are the same, and that one will be different. So that's really, really helpful, and I've done that a few times when clients are like questioning, like, hey, like, do we want to change the look of this navbar? I'm not really sure. I'll just change it on some old page that they have and be like, hey, what do you think about this? And they can kind of comment on that. Although I'm now only just starting to use this I'll use this feature. A lot of the Webflow community seem to really enjoy what Webflow actually calls interactions. So this allows you to chain together events to create some pretty cool effects. So for example, you can detect the user scrolling to make a certain element move around the page. Some triggers for this type of stuff include, mouse events, which include click, move, hover. There's scrolling. So in various states, like when an element is scrolled into view, for example, is one of the bigger states there. You can also detect like page load and then have it do something. I've only done this a couple of times with hover effects. I haven't done it very efficiently as far as I know, but some people are getting some crazy effects on pages, and I'm just diving into this feature now, so it's definitely something that you should give it a go, because you can get a couple of free Webflow projects when you sign up. They have all the details on their website about that, but you could kind of dive in and see like, oh, like, let's mess around with some interactions, because they're pretty cool. Also, Webflow can be used to just make the UI and then actually moved to a different platform or a web server via the export code feature. So I've seen on YouTube there's a YouTube channel I watch named Flux. The guy there, he uses Webflow all the time from what I can tell, and he has on several occasions just kind of mentioned off the cuff that you can export the code and use it somewhere else. So for example, in our case, for a lot of like really small business sites, especially if it's a business card website, we'll use a CMS called Couch or Couch CMS, however they want to call themselves. But if we want to quickly make the website in Webflow, but don't want to use their hosting or their CMS, I can actually export that code and it'll give me all that code. And since I made my own custom class names and everything else, it's like really, really easy for me to have there. Really, really easy for me to easily, take that code base, literally retrofit Couch CMS in there, because that's what Couch is for. It's retrofitting a CMS into a static site, and then boom, there you go. And you don't have to worry about paying the hosting fees or anything from Webflow itself. In addition, Webflow now has an e-commerce beta. So this, I want to be clear here, this is a beta at this time. For those of you that are looking to make an online store, the beta is available to everyone. Now it's not like a closed beta; it's available to everyone there. It's on their website. All the actual details are on there, of course. But I have, just full disclaimer, I have yet to use this feature, as it's still in development and quite new to the general population of Webflow, and I haven't had a need for it yet. However, they have a very clear pricing plan, and it's very clear on their website with all the details as to what you're getting into if you go and use the beta. And this means that you could make your UI with the visual tools, export the code, and then use the CMS and hosting solution of your choice. So that kind of goes back to the other point, is you could easily make up your UI, take it to the platform of your choice. But if you want to stick with Webflow, you could stick on Webflow, use the e-commerce, use their hosting, use their CMS, everything. So this is where Webflow differs from something like WordPress or something like that, where maybe you could retrofit some solution where you have WordPress populating some static code and then you copy the things, but you really don't want to be doing that. In general, like that's just like really janky, but this is actually developed for this. So if you really don't want to be paying Webflow, or you really just want to be designing and you create something cool and you're like, oh shoot, I really want it on this other platform, you can absolutely do that. But if you have something that comes up where you're like, hey, I want to stick with the e-commerce side of things, or hey, I want to, eventually use the Webflow CMS because I just want to like leave it here, you absolutely have those options. So you have a whole bunch of different options for your project that you can easily kind of go toward, which is what I'm trying to say, which is kind of adds to the visual coding aspect, because when you're coding, when you're just coding in the open, you're just able to kind of go whatever direction you want, and that's exactly what Webflow is giving to you for the most part. So that leads directly into my next point, which is hosting. Webflow offers a range of hosting plans that range from simple sites that don't need a CMS at all, through e-commerce, like I mentioned before, and then you can also there's also other team plans for teams that run full development agencies. So one thing I want to be very clear is that you need to really check out which plan is right for you before you begin putting together projects to ensure you get all the features you need. So that goes back to one of the things that Mike said, where there's limitations. There's absolutely limitations here. There's, form limitations. There's CMS API limitations. There's traffic limitations, etc., etc., etc. So just make sure that you know exactly what you want and scalable within, like, make sure you buy the plan that's scalable within what you think you're going to be the numbers you're going to be hitting, and just make sure you hit those numbers and make sure that you're doing that correctly, because you don't want your site to have an issue. You don't want to have to like quickly upgrade the customer's hosting plan when their traffic's too high, only to then, you know, have them pissed off at you because, hey, like, why is this, you know, no longer this price, it's now this price a month, like, what's going on here, kind of thing. So just make sure you go through their charts, the Webflow pricing charts on their website. Just make sure you get all that stuff all together before you go ahead. In general, I find that Webflow pricing, this is a personal opinion, for hosting and CMS are quite expensive, I find. However, it's more of a quote-unquote luxury hosting, in my opinion. So for example, we do use Webflow CMS and as well with the hosting. So since the spring / summer of 2018, which is when we started using Webflow, I've only seen personally one outage, and if there was even any more, it was only that outage actually affected anything for our customers. So our customer sent us an email and was like, "Hey, what's going on?" And Webflow was already there. They had responded on their alerts page saying, "Hey, yes, we have a problem, and we were going to fix it," and it was fixed quickly. No data loss, no issues there, whatever. So this is sort of more hands-on. This is what I mean by luxury hosting. It's more hands-on hosting, where it's like they're kind of handling a lot of the stuff and you're not really diving into the technical stuff. You're really using that designer to make the website, to put together the CMS, to do all that stuff. And then they're kind of handling all the technical stuff. So that's kind of why it is more expensive. So you do pay for what you get, but if you have a really easy project, like I said, you can always export that code. It's important, one thing to note, that Webflow is not like a standard host with cPanel. So a lot of you guys will probably have like a reseller package, or just use a hosting plan with cPanel, or that's what you're used to. It's not like that. Webflow only deals with the website. It does not take over your name server. It does not, doesn't have webmail, doesn't have an email solution in there. It doesn't have other features that you'll find in a lot of cPanel accounts. Webflow is about the website, and then in the more recent case, the e-commerce shop. It is not there to host all your email and do all this other crazy stuff and have redirects and add on domains. It doesn't do that. I want to be totally clear. It only exclusively does the website or the e-commerce stuff at this point. So make sure you take that into consideration. If you're like, hey, Webflow sounds great and I want to move my clients over, you make sure they have like a proper name server where they can mess around with it, and make sure you know how to connect your Webflow site to the actual domain name. Instructions are rather easy, but just a thing of note, because we have to always explain that to clients. Like, hey, this isn't like your old school. It's not even old school. It's still very common. Your hosting that you're on right now. When we move you to Webflow, we need to make sure that, hey, your domain registrar actually allows you to change the DNS records, so we can point it to Webflow, and we need to make sure that we're able to connect you to your email service of choice, etc., etc. So just something of note for anyone diving into this. So that leads us directly sort of into the CMS. So I'll kind of go through this now. The Webflow CMS is broken down into collections, which host content of a single type. And within each collection are collection items. So to clarify that, I have a basic breakdown here. So if you think about it, a blog, which would be the collection, contains posts, which are collection items, and each post has a group of editable fields, so things that users can edit, such as the title, the post body, the cover image, etc. And these editable fields are selected by the designer. So you go in, so let's say you have a blank Webflow project and you're like, I want to add a blog. You literally add a collection, you name it blog or blog post. Now you add your editable fields that you would want, and every single time your users go to add or go to write something, when they add something, they're adding a post, which is a collection item, and they get to edit each of those fields. So like I said, the title, post body, cover image, whatever you add, they get to edit those fields. And so there are a bunch of different fields here that you can add to a Webflow collection, and they include things like plain text, rich text, image, video link, just a plain old link, email, phone, number, so literally just a number where they can go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. Date and time. There's a toggle switch. there's color, there's an option drop down, there's a file upload field, there's what's called a reference or a multi-reference field. And I want to go over those because those are sort of Webflow specific. So specifically for the reference CMS fields, they're being used to reference other CMS collections. So I have an example here to clarify. So you could have a blog post with all the standard fields like the title, the post body, etc., and then have a reference field that points to a quote-unquote authors collection that contains all the authors' names and social media links and all that stuff. And then when you're editing a blog post, you would be able to select that author in a drop-down menu, and that drop-down menu would automatically be populated via the other referenced collection. So for example, if you just have 2 people that you trust to edit the site, but you have 10 writers, you'd go in to your authors collection. You would add a bunch of authors, which are the collection items, add a bunch of authors, add their social links, add all that. And then when your 2 editors log into the site and they add stuff, they'd be able to go, oh, who authored this? Oh, Matt authored this. Oh, Mike authored this. Oh, like Jim authored this, whoever. And they just use that drop down and any of that information can be populated now into this other thing. So you at the bottom is a typical way to do it. At the bottom, it'd be like, by Matt, and here's his Twitter and his Facebook and whatever you'd like to have. It just references another collection. Now, a multi-reference is often used for obviously like looking at multiple, like pulling multiple people, so you could have multiple authors, for example, but it's more often used in my experience to actually add tags to a blog post. So you could have, your common tags in one collection. So maybe you do news and tech news and world news or something like that. So you have those 3 news categories. You could easily tag your post with, oh, this one's tech news and just news, or this one's just world news, or this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a multiple selector for the standard reference field. Now, I want to say one thing is that you really need to keep in mind that the Webflow CMS does have limitations on how many reference and multi-reference fields you can add to a collection. If memory serves, I believe it's 4, but the UI will let you know. But it's just something so you can't make this crazy like data structure. You just, you have to work within the limitations. And in general, the CMS will also limit how many fields you can add to a collection, and the amount that the limit does depend on which plan you choose. So just make sure you look through all your options and do your research, like I said before, to ensure that the plan you choose is right for you. So this leads us to more of the user side, like what will your user see, because you generally don't want to give them access to the designer, and they have access to what's called the editor. So the Webflow editor is for the people that are editing the website but don't want to access the designer, like I said. So Webflow specifically refers to these accounts as collaborators, and the editor offers a trimmed down editing interface that allows those with access to use the CMS to add items to collections via a standard editor that you'd see on something like WordPress, where they can use text boxes to edit those titles, edit their posts with the rich text fields, etc., etc. The editor also allows users to edit some elements on the page, such as text and images, by hovering over the elements and pressing an edit button, which is a more simple approach than the more advanced designer that you as the developer will be using. Now, one thing I will say about this is that this is really helpful when you don't want to add a collection item for something really simple. So most recently we had a client who had a literal chart of different staff members, and they had a bunch of different staff, public staff like information where you could contact these staff members. But they also had just a straight up phone number and just like a general office phone number and a general office fax number. So instead of me adding another collection or adding like, half of like a collection, so like no name, none of this, none of that, you have to like toggle a switch to say no, this is literally just the general office number. Instead of adding all of that logic in one collection item to make Webflow understand, oh yes, this is, don't display staff name, just display general phone number. Instead of doing all that, I literally just typed it into a text field, and if the customer has to edit it, they simply browse to that page with the editor, with themselves logged into the editor. They can double click on that, or hover and click the edit button and just change that number whenever they'd like. They don't need to use specifically the CMS for an edit like that. So just something that some people might be interested in. So for example, we have another client who will constantly change the title of their blog. So just like the title where it says, just based on seasons. So it'll say like more news, and in this case, it'd be like more seasonal news or more of this news or more of that news. They like to just change that heading that's above all their blog posts. They're able to do that without me adding a whole CMS where I'm pulling dynamically. You don't need to worry about that. They can just simply hover over that, click the little pencil, and just edit it right there. And it's really easy for them, and they understand it. And they can also edit some images like that as well. That actually leads us directly into limitations, because as with all site builders, there are some limitations that get in the way, and this applies just because obviously someone has designed this software, so there's going to be holes in the user experience because they didn't consider it, or that's just not a part of their vision, etc., etc. So again, always do your research. So I'm going to kind of go through a couple of the things that we hit specifically. So pagination is one of them. So pagination wasn't possible until recently. So I want to be clear that this is available now. Pagination is available now. But back even a couple of months ago, large blogs would be limited in showing off their posts. And there was like a workaround that could be enacted. But in my experience, it kind of really hurt loading times, especially if there were hundreds of posts. But again, it is now available to all users. So that has been blocked. And that's an testament to Webflow updating their platform. Sliders are, in my opinion, kind of a serious problem. Sliders are not fully editable. So users within the editor can edit individual photos that appear within a slider, but they're actually unable to add or remove slides. That functionality is limited to the designer. So I've found a workaround for this, but it is extremely limited, and I had to limit the amount of slides. I actually ended up using all the collection lists, as Webflow calls them. I used up all the collection list modules I was allowed to have on a page doing my workaround. So it does work for our client, but it is limited. This is something that I really feel like they should add to the editor, because if you add 5 slides and the user always has 5 slides, that's easy for them. They can go into their editor, they hover over each image, they could change each of the 5 images. But if one day they need 4, the logic for 5 is there, the logic for 4 is not. And so now we have this problem where we have just an extra slide just sitting there, and you can't edit that from the editor. It has to be edited from the designer. So just a bit of a disconnect there. And a lot of people have been commenting about this in the forums over the past couple of years. So hopefully something gets added. Hopefully some additional functionality gets added. We were also going to be using, I think we mentioned this before, we were going to use the Webflow, you're going to use Webflow, for the HAT website, for the HTML All the Things website. However, limitations in how collections work limited our ability to do so. So specifically, we were unable to have different post types, so that would be like our podcast, our blog, etc., and still be able to show them in a mixed list on the front page. We'd be limited to displaying them in different sections per collection, so like kind of how we have on our separate pages, like our blog, our guide page, our podcast page. We'd be limited because, so our homepage right now literally just takes all our posts of all the types, right, and literally just has them all right there in the homepage in one massive chronological list. We wouldn't be able to do that. We can only, in a list like that on Webflow, you can only display a single collection. And so therefore we'd be like, oh shoot, now we have like, because there's the podcast format is a bit different than the snippets format is a bit different than the blogs format is a bit different across all of them. So there's like a disconnect there. So hopefully eventually they allow a collection list to actually reference more than one collection. So you could just pull everything into what we call our hub. But that's one limitation we hit. We also had another customer that wanted to put ads in an ad collection. Each item would contain a banner that would be displayed on the site in a random order, and that random order changed on every refresh. However, we were unable to do that with Webflow's system specifically. Their version of random order, because there is like an option for random order, is actually keep it around. So I'm just going to pull a quote here from the Webflow website. So, quote, "Keep in mind that because we cache your site pages on a CDN, which is why they load so fast, your random sorts on published sites will refresh once every 12 hours. The upside is that everyone viewing the site will see the same random order." So now this did end up working for this client, but however, his existing website does just do a random order on refresh, and it would have been nice to just been able to do that. Just been like, hey, there's 8 collection items, and I just want to show 4 at a time. Give me just a random order on every refresh. That would have been nice. Now, there are pros here, so I want to just talk about the pros of the limitations. I know that sounds weird, but so these limitations are either very specific to the customer, clearly as we've gone through, like, oh, a customer hit this one random snag in the like 100 features that they wanted, right? So these limitations are either very specific to the customer or they've been fixed with updates. So for example, the pagination. Again, that's with the exception of the slider editor that really should hurry itself through the development, in my opinion. Webflow does update their platform rather often, so there is a very good chance that more functionality will be added in the months to come. And e-commerce is a new major feature that has been added since we started using Webflow. So it's been just under a year that we've been using Webflow, and e-commerce has been added, and that's a huge step forward. In addition to this, a lot of workarounds and additional functionality can be unlocked by adding your own scripts to it. So you can actually add your own JavaScript functions and own JavaScript scripts into your web pages, which we have done to fix up a few things or to embed certain things, etc., etc. So if you understand JavaScript, you might be able to work around a lot of these issues. It just depends on your skill level and your engineering level of like, oh, maybe I could pull this ID and change this around, etc., etc. So it's kind of sky's the limit within a limit, if that makes sense. But basically, yeah, so you have your Webflow system, and then you are able to manipulate it with custom JavaScript and try to figure out a solution should you hit any of these limitations. So I know that was long-winded, so I just want to go over a brief conclusion. So the designer offers a unique quote-unquote visual coding experience that anyone familiar to CSS can take full advantage of. The CMS and hosting are pricey, but sites load fast and are fixed quickly when there's an issue from our experience. So you're kind of you're paying for you get what you pay for. The editor offers a limited, easy-to-use interface for staff members that may not be tech savvy, but they still need to edit the site's content. So it's a perfect editor for them. The documentation and active community make it quick and easy to get help. I've asked a few questions in the forums. I've actually find most question answers in the forums for Webflow. There's a really active community there. It's really, really good. There's also like a wish list too. So something like the slider editor or adding tables, I think was one that I found last night. So and Webflow staff will mark it as like, in development, in the backlog, etc., etc. Also, exporting code, and this is like a really big one in my opinion, exporting code allows you to take your design to another compatible platform easily, avoiding the hosting and CMS plan charges. And another use case for that I just thought of as well is also if you just have like a reseller package, you could always make your design in Webflow and then export that code in like a fixed static form, and when you're working with a client on design changes like that, you could easily put it onto their web server and just like /test or /whatever, and you could easily show them the code running static and be like, hey, do you like this? In addition, Webflow does host it on their side as well, with Webflow with a .webflow.io, I believe it is, subdomain, so you could always show them it there. Webflow is really client friendly. As Mike mentioned, I have a client who likes to sit on the phone for a couple hours and we just kind of work together, and he just literally sits there and he goes like, I want this changed. I'll like, change it up, publish it. I say, hey, refresh in a couple minutes. He refreshes and boom, he sees the new change, and we work through changes like that. And it's really, really fast. It's really, really easy, and it's remote. So it's really, really useful. I think I'm going to give my voice a rest, and I'm going to pass it to Mike now to web news, unless he has any comments about that.
Whew. I mean, that's probably your longest segment yet.
A lot to say though, because we've been using it for a long time.
It was a lot of good information for sure. Don't have any comments. I do have a question. So you mentioned there's the designer, the CMS, and you're saying there's a separate editor as well. Is that three separate things, or is the CMS and editor the same thing?
So how the CMS works is, so basically like in the designer, so if you add a plan with hosting and CMS, what happens is you in the designer have to choose what dynamic data can be added by people in the editor and where that data gets put. So if, for example, I make a page, so let's say I make a real easy, I have a news blog, and I literally make a news blog page. So I literally have a page there, and I have my title, I have my byline, I have my cover photo, and my post body, real easy. In the designer, I have to click like, okay, new collection, news, so I'm going to name it news, and then I have to go in and be like, okay, what editable fields are within this? Well, there's a title, which is always there. Then I have a byline, I have an image uploader, and I have a post body, and then I save. Now I can add posts myself in there, but what that does is that gives access to people in the editor to actually edit those things. And in the designer, I choose where those fields go. So I let's say I made that static news page, and everything's static. Like I literally put the title's called test, the byline's called test, the post body's lorem ipsum, a random stock photo is the cover photo. I literally go in and I select, I say like this, pull this from the collection news, and pull this from collection news field title, pull this from collection news field like cover photo. And it's really easy, like it's just like a selector in the UI, but basically it's like you set up, for the most part, you set up the CMS, you can add to it in the designer, and then the editor exclusively can add, remove, and manage the content, but can't change where the fields are, like where the fields appear on the site, and it can't change what fields are there.
Gotcha. So essentially, you control the CMS and the editor, and the client only really. Oh, sorry, the CMS and the designer, and the client really only needs to use the editor.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Cool. All right. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. But yeah, other than that, cool. So let's move on to our web news this week, which is the cookie law. So I'm sure a lot of you that are web developers, web designers out there know of this, but I just wanted to inform and have a little bit of discussion about it. So as of May 2018, there was a reform of the EU, so the European Union's like privacy laws. So it's called the GDPR law. And so what it did was, and I'm sure everyone's seen it now, if a company operates in the EU at any point, in any capacity, which means that if their website is accessible by the EU, which is any website, period, they must abide by the rules in this law. And so what that made was, and what those rules state is, you must show the people that are visiting your website what you're collecting and storing about the user and about the user's actions, and allow that user to opt out of that collection. So it's pretty much saying like, what cookies do you store and what cookies are you using on that particular user, and then have like a consent, or I agree, I disagree, a yes or no to collecting cookies. And I'm sure everyone's seen it. You go to a site, there's a big, usually a fairly large pop-up with yes or no, a consent, and then also a paragraph of what the actual company is using. So it is, in my opinion, fairly intrusive, the pop-up, and I think it's on purpose. Like, that's part of the law. It has to be very distinct. It can't be like, a tiny little footnote on the website. It has to be the first thing that people see. It has to be very like in your face. And it's great, like on one hand, it is great to have the transparency, because privacy is a huge concern for a lot of people out there. And it's good that now, like, the EU of all places is forcing pretty much the entire world to take on this transparency, which is kind of cool. I'll give it to them for that. But the only thing is, it does lead to an annoying user experience. So a user going to a site multiple times and seeing having to take away this massive thing that's blocking half their view or blocking their whole view, depending on how the site implements it, is annoying. And it's like, if it happened once every month or so, I think I would be okay with it. And I don't think it would be a huge detriment to the users. But the fact that, like, I can go to a site one day, go back the next day, and it'll prompt me again because their cookies either expired or my cookies were refreshed. I mean, this is all about the cookies. Is, in my opinion, a detrimental user experience that should be like looked at and solved in the future. I mean, I don't really have any super good solutions to it. The one thing that I think I actually took from one of Matt's Twitter posts on HTML the things, is that what if we had like a separate site, maybe even the EU could run this site where you could have like an accept all cookies button there. And it's very, distinct that if you go to this site and you press it, it'll remove those cookie buttons, or it'll at least like hide them for a while. And people will have to consent to obviously doing that, and it'll be a very deliberate consent in my opinion, because they'll have to find this site. It's not going to just appear on in front of people all the time. I think that could work. I mean, I see some issues with it as well, but like I'm just trying to think of a way that it could be done a little bit better than what it is right now, because right now, like every site that stores cookies has to have one of these, and it's just like a huge thing right in front of your face that you have to keep dismissing. It's like a persistent
as well. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Like a browser extension could work. Like you're saying a browser extension could work to help it.
Yeah, like you could do like an accept all, and if you tag, I mean, however the logic would work, but if you tag all the cookie things with a certain type of tag, like kind of like how AdBlock works, right?
Yeah, so it actually, funny that you brought that up. AdBlock used to block those things, but I think the EU hid them as well.
Oh, wow.
So if you make a browser extension that removes those things from a website, you could potentially be going against the law of the GDPR. But I mean, like if they were to themselves release a browser extension, I guess that could work as well. It would be cool, actually. One thing that browser extension could do, and if it was like sanctioned by the EU, now that you brought that up, is every time you go to a site, it could give you like a little, badge notification on that browser extension. And when you click on that, it'll pop up the consent form. You know what I mean? So you can always view it whenever you want. And then you'll know that each site has it because there's a little badge there and stuff like that. Like it could be a good deliberate opt out, but also a way to keep that transparency for every site. So that's a pretty good idea. If hopefully if anyone from the EU GDPR law office is listening, maybe they can implement something like that. I doubt they will. So pretty much a few questions. How do you feel about the required transparency? And then a more general question, do you think that the EU can be overbearing at times with these anti-corporate, pro-consumer type laws? For instance, like as a separate side note, they hit Google with a $5 billion fine just this last summer, I think, because like the reason for the fine, $5 billion, a huge amount of money, is that the Android platform is just being too dominant and it's using its dominance too much. So they like essentially what I'm hearing, and I don't know which way I lean fully on this one. This is kind of like where I stand on the fence. Whereas like Android created such a good competitive product that they're now detrimenting themselves. Like they're now detrimenting the customer from having a choice on of using a different product. So they're not letting different players come into the game. They're not letting different software solutions like different search engines come into the game and dominate. Like they're being anti-competitive, which is what the EU wants to stop. They want more competition. But what this does technically, sometimes, and it's already been happening, is that it puts that pricing, like that $5 billion, that Google will just put it right back onto the customer. Because they'll be like, oh, well, we have to pay $5 billion, so now we have to raise our price of every phone we sell in the EU by $5 or $10 to solve for that $5 billion because we're going to be losing that. So, like, it's kind of like I mean, in Canada, we also have the CRTC, which does similar things here, where they're trying to be pro-consumer, but what they do is they find these companies like Bell and Rogers, and Bell and Rogers are like, well, keep finding us. That's fine. We're just going to put it right back onto the customer so that they start hating on the CRTC. Like, essentially, every move that either company like Bell or Rogers or the CRTC do affects the customer negatively. Like, we've almost never had a situation where like we had a win or the CRTC had a win that affected us positively in every way. Like, we'll have a short-term positive effect, but then Bell and Rogers would be like, oh, well, we're raising all the prices of the plans by $10. We just like, and their logic will be, we're not making as much money as we were before this law passed by the CRTC, and our shareholders need all that extra money. Like, they need to be swimming in cash. They need to literally have a pool of money. I mean, Bell is one of the most, anyway, you know what? I'm not going to go on this rant right now. I'm going to pass it off to you, Matt, on your thoughts.
I was about to say, like, this is turning into a carrier conversation, isn't it?
Yep, that's a bit different conversation.
So going back to the whole EU thing, there's a really there's a really like fine line between having like a competitive, scrappy hustle business, which is sort of at your startup phase, and when you become like a titan in a space, I think. But I think the mentality doesn't change, if that makes any sense. So it's like when you start out as a startup, like when Google or whoever, any business starts out as a startup and they succeed, let's say, their startup phase was like a scrappy hustle, let's get it done, and they killed it in a certain product category, or they found a niche, or they blew up, like it became viral. However they got their success, they became a titan. And I think that the mentality in the company, whereas it becomes more bureaucratic because you have hundreds, if not thousands of employees and hundreds, if not thousands of offices around the world, like big tech giants would, I think that the mentality is still that scrappy hustle. Like they still want to look for the new app to develop, the new service to develop. They're just doing it on a bigger scale. And so I don't necessarily agree with, admittedly, I don't know a lot about this specific situation with the $5 billion fine. But if it is just for being a competitive product, what did you want that company to do? Did you want them to develop Android 70% of the quality it is, and then be like, okay, we gotta wait? Like, what was the idea behind that? Like, you can't really go to a private company and be like, just, can you wait for your competitor? When the whole goal of business is to, beat your competitors or at least match them. You're supposed to carve out a piece of the market for yourself. It'd be like saying, like, we're kind of, breaking out of our startup phase, I'd say, right now. Digital Dynasty Design is specifically. And I would say that it would be outrageous for us to hit the line. So, like, be right on that line of startup to, like, I don't know what the next phase of normal running business, just like an everyday business. And we're like about to hire our first staff member. Let's say we're right on that line. We're about to break out of the startup phase. And somebody like a government officer of some kind, admittedly we're not in the EU, but a government officer of us comes up to us of some kind and says, can you wait for those other guys that are behind you? Can you wait a couple of years so they can catch up to you? Like, it's a weird, like, that's a strange thing to say, because it's like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm gonna move on here. Like, I want to go forward. Now, I don't know whether the $5 billion included something else. Like, again, I don't know anything about this specific situation. Whether that $5 billion was because of some sort of random weird practice that they were doing, I don't know.
Well, like, I can explain a little bit more. Like, the random weird practice is that it's to do with their search engine. It's mostly to do with Google search, and they don't, or the EU find them because every Android phone has to have Google search. That's one of the musts. Like, to get you have to have Google Apps. To have Google Apps, you have to have Google search. Like, you can't have Google Apps without Google search.
Like the actual Google search app?
Yes, exactly. Like, you can't have the Play Store, right?
Right.
And not have Google search on your phone. And so they're saying that it doesn't give a chance for any other search engine, because you're requiring, to get all the apps on your phone, you're requiring the phone to have Google search on it. Now, like, you could still download a different search engine and use it, but they're saying the majority of companies, the majority of people won't do that, because as soon as you get a search engine, you're just going to use it. I mean, that's just logic.
I mean, there's
why would you? Yeah, there's a reason for I mean, Google is the best search engine. There are different ones. DuckDuckGo is a good one as well. Like, I've used that off and on. I wouldn't say that Bing is a good one, but Google is by far the best one, regardless. But their argument is that you should be allowed to download the Play Store without having to also download Google search, so that people can download the Play, so that a company a phone company, right? Like a phone company selling phones could then download the Play Store, have the Play Store on the device, and have DuckDuckGo as their default search engine, kind of thing.
As a person,
it's a tough one, right?
As a person that came from a BlackBerry 10 device, there were alternatives.
But no one used them.
Well, I mean, the Amazon App Store was put on there by default for a while.
But again, you couldn't have you couldn't sell a phone with the Amazon App Store and the Play Store. Like that's what they're saying. Like you can't. Google doesn't allow you to like. It's against their TOS to have another Play Store on there, to have another like App Store. If you want the Play Store,
like you're saying, as an OEM, like Samsung can't.
Yes.
Well, wait a second here. What about the Samsung App Store?
Samsung,
the Galaxy
I guess,
App
pays
Store.
Google. Samsung, I guess, pays Google like a ludicrous amount of money to do that. Like that's most likely a private contract that they worked out with Google.
Unless there's like some weird workaround where the first time you boot the phone, it downloads it or something weird.
I doubt. Yeah, I doubt.
I doubt that. I don't know.
I'm almost guaranteed that Samsung and Google worked out a contract for that.
See, like this is like a weird spiral now, because it's like, well, is Internet Explorer, or Microsoft Edge, or the Microsoft Store, or I mean now Candy Crush Saga, or whatever the hell they keep preloading on my device, my Windows 10. Like, what are those unfair advantages now? Like, I don't.
Yeah, it's a very fine line. Like I don't know. I honestly don't know, because the worry that I have is that Google created Android, right? And then they open sourced Android so that anyone can use it for anything they want.
Right.
So Google did that for the betterment, like technically it's the betterment of themselves, but also for the betterment of the industry. And they're like, obviously they're monetizing it in a way. So they're monetizing it by including their applications. So like if you want to use their Play Store, like their created app store, you have to use their applications. Like you have to install those applications on your phone. That's their requirement. Like that's their like thing. Like if you want to use this thing that we created, the requirement is install these other things. And then you can use that thing we created and then sell your phone without paying us a fee.
Well,
Android is free.
You can, like, one second here. You could, like, if Samsung said, and I'm asking, I don't know. If Samsung said, okay, we only want to have the Galaxy App Store, or what if they said, like, we're not shipping with an App Store?
Yeah, they could do that.
You could do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's not the lawsuit is the fact that if a manufacturer wants to have the Play Store on it, like the Google Play Store, the lawsuit is saying you should allow them to have to not install all the other Play Store apps, like all the other Google apps. You shouldn't require them to have Google search on there.
That adds a lot of salt, I think, to the or more questions, I guess, to the situation, because now it's like, I kind of get where they're coming from, because it's like, well, technically speaking, Google search isn't vital to the technical functionality of Google Play Store. And so it'd be the same as saying, like, if AT&T came into your home and installed a phone line for a single telephone, and then you went to, I know this is literally impossible, but like, let's say you went to Bell somehow, and you got Bell to install another phone upstairs, and AT&T goes, whoa, you can't have a Bell line in here. Like you unless there was like let's say from technical perspective, you could, like, it was a technical possibility. Yeah. But they were like, no, AT&T, this is an AT&T home now.
Yeah. That would be annoying.
Well, that's also a little bit ridiculous. And I don't know whether it's as severe as that with such an app, because there's so many freaking Google apps I don't even pay attention to them. But yeah, I wonder if it hinges on technical viability.
Yeah, I don't know. Like well, I mean, for Google, it hinges on the fact that they make a lot of money on that search app. Like they would need to charge more for the Play Store, right? Like, so I think the solution that they came up with is like to not get this fine again. And I believe actually they're being fined again for something similar. But one of the solutions they came up with was to release the Play Store, but instead of charging the manufacturer $5, they're going to be charging the manufacturer like $15 per phone now, something like that. Like they're going to increase the charge per phone because they're not making that revenue on the search app anymore, or like they're assuming they're not going to make as much. Which makes sense for them. And then that $10 that they've added to every phone is now being passed on to the user. Obviously, like the manufacturer's not going to take that $10.
And the thing
these are arbitrary numbers. I'm not 100% sure exactly how much it is, but
yeah, you're just like throwing estimated numbers out there.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, but essentially that's the case. Like this is what's happening every time that, yes, they are fighting for, users' rights, but every time they fight for users' rights, the users get punished in some way. Cause like what's the solution here? The solution would be to allow a different competitor into the field. Who's the other competitor? There's no other competitor right now. Even with this law, you can't, like, is BlackBerry going to come back with BB10 and take over the industry?
I mean,
no,
you have
iOS.
You have iOS.
No, obviously, like, but I'm like, two competitors is not. This isn't an argument for iOS. This is an argument for a third part, like another person to be able to come into the game, not for iOS who's already in the game. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's, if I see the point, like if they keep doing this and they keep knocking Google down and down and down and down and try to like get them to the point where, oh, maybe another company does make another OS and then a third party comes into the game, a big third party, like, and they're able to actually get a foothold and it's actually a really good thing. That in my opinion, that would be great. Like if we had a third offering for, or even a fourth and a fifth, a bunch of offerings for different phone like different phone software systems. I mean, there's positives and negatives to that as well, because now you're going to get even more fragmentation. Like we've been talking about having app overload, talk about having device overload. Like, oh, I can only use this device for, email and texting. This device I can use for whatever. Like, I feel like that would happen if we had like infinite amounts of competition in the game. Like there would be literal device overload. You'd be carrying 5 or 6 different devices for different things. Like it's almost a guarantee with how the industry is moving. I don't know. It's a tough one. It's a tough cookie to crack.
Well, I think one of the things that makes it so tough is the fact that it's supposed to, I mean, relatively it's supposed to be a free market, like a regulated free market, and it's hard to tell when regulation and government intervention needs to interject itself into a free market. Like if like what I said, if the goal is profit, Google's doing their job. At the same time, if we want there to be regulations and consumer protections, like there needs, like there's like everyone always oversteps, like everyone does. Like Google will overstep, the EU will overstep, like every government will overstep. Everything gets overstepped and then gets typically like drawn back generally. Like it'll get trimmed, it'll get refined, it'll get fixed. Because this is like, the internet is still like a relatively new invention, so it's still. I think I would say that my opinion hinges on the fact specifically of whether or not there's a technical requirement for it. If Google search was required in some way for the searching inside of the Google Play Store to function, and whether they, I mean, if that is my opinion, like let's say I'm a lawmaker, they're gonna make it so that you need both from a technical perspective.
Yeah.
100%. But I mean, they should be. They're trying to avoid, like they're trying to make money. Like they should be, like that's still within the confines of the law. Like you're like they're still like that's what I'm saying is the startup phase kind of fades, but like they're still scrappy. Like they're not as like, they're not working out of a garage anymore, but like Google obviously isn't working out of someone's garage, but like it's still like they still have that mentality of like, where's the money lie? Like, let's go get that. Like, obviously, otherwise what are they doing? And to bring it back to like the cookie conversation, is the cookie conversation to me is like a weird, because it's a weird thing, because we're talking about like Google again with this like huge fine and all this, but Google's like a titan, and whether you think this Google search thing is like morally good or bad or whatever, like this cookie thing is affecting a lot smaller businesses, little news sites and stuff like that. And a lot of it is you're right. It's really annoying for the consumer, because it's the same as like the terms of service. Like nobody reads that thing, and they just click accept. And so it's like, are they overstepping in this particular case because they're now affecting not the giants, right? Like Google can pay a $5 billion fine at the end of the day. But like, I'm not saying that they're fining the little guys, like the little websites, $5 billion. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is like now they have like something like another worry, and people will get like the general populace doesn't understand this stuff, and so they might be like, ah, stupid, like, you know, this site's stupid, I gotta keep pressing OK.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that's almost like it, they're doing, like, the company is forced to do something anti-consumer, and they don't want to be doing that. They want the clicks, they want the views. And so I don't know, I think this is the inevitable struggle, and this might seem like it's off topic, but I really don't think it is I think this is the inevitable struggle of where we want our tech to be in 10 years. And what I mean by that is I'm a really big advocate of smart speakers, as you hear them talking in the background all the time. And my thing is that if you watch a movie, because a lot of like our stuff comes from like sci-fi ideas, right? Cell phones are basically Star Trek communicators, really. So if you think about like us moving forward, if you think about Star Trek, again, let's just use that. They go to a computer and they literally just say, do a task. And it has like a certain limitations, sure, but it just does the task. It wasn't trained or programmatically created to do that particular task. It is intelligent enough to have a set of tools, and when a user invokes a verbal command, it physically understands like what to do, like what tools to use, in what order, and how to use them. And if we want our computers, our smart speakers, our websites, whatever, to be smart in the future within 10 years, because I think AI and all machine learning and all that is going to be the next biggest thing. If we want it to be truly customized for us within 10 years, I don't think your privacy and knowing where all your data is physically possible. And I know I understand that sounds ridiculous. But like if I go to my Google Assistant, let's say, and I go to my Google Assistant in 10 years and I say like, I'm not feeling well, I have a cold, for example. In the future, like in like the sci-fi world, in the fictional sci-fi world, that computer may order me the exact like soup, medicine, and whatever else that I would normally use and buy and consume when I am sick with a cold. But it got that not because I went into a program and selected out of drop-down menus like this soup, this cold medicine. It understood that because it had my data, and that's one of its tools. And so this is a constant conflict of like one of the arguments for ads is that you're going around, like if you're a photographer, right? And you go in and you pick up a whole bunch of cookies of like, you've been on like the Canon website, you've been on Amazon looking at different cameras, you've been to a bunch of different like websites just for photography in general. A lot of your ads are going to be photography related, including on YouTube. I'm noticing that a lot of my friends will have completely different ads on YouTube than I do. Because we're like a startup business, I see Ty Lopez more than I see my own family, to be blunt. Like, honestly, like it's I mean, that's obviously a bit of a joke. I'm not watching his full like 50-minute ads, but like in all actuality, like it's because we're in the startup game and he's a business guy, like I'm seeing him left, right, and center. But I will say that is a lot more relevant to me than like selling me, I don't know, a bike or a baby crib or a sports car or something else. Like it's a lot more relevant to me, and the experience is better. And a lot of these guys like the advertisers will argue like, hey, like this is better. Like this is better for you. Yeah, it is, because I will sometimes click on an ad. If I see something and be like, oh, that's interesting, I'll click on it. I don't care. Because I know it's a Google ad. I know it's going somewhere generally safe. And so like I'm like, oh, or like an Amazon ad will pop up somewhere and I'll be like, I guess I do want to buy that. And I understand that that's what they're trying to get me to do, but that experience is better. And that goes towards like the computer has your data as one of its tools. And people are so like worried. Like I would be worried about things like if the webcam was always on, if the microphone was always on, if stuff like that. Like if these speakers are listening to me right now, which I
think they are.
They probably are. I don't know.
Well,
I don't know if they are.
To a certain degree, they're waiting for a command, so they're technically listening.
They're waiting for a command, but are they taking what I'm saying, understanding it, and sending it off to a data center to be processed?
I doubt that right now. No, I don't. I don't think they're doing that. I think that's overblown. Like, I don't think that happens.
I will say something though. I will say that I have said things in a room around my phone, not around my smart speakers, around my phone, and I get an ad for it.
Yeah, it's been proven multiple times that it's usually because not only have you said it, you've talked to someone about it on Facebook, you've accidentally like looked at something for too long on a site where they record how long you look at stuff. Like, it's most likely not being processed from your speech. It's most likely taken from a different source that's more still creepy, but more feasible for a company to do. Like, to process all speech, they would need like data centers that they don't have. That's the issue. Like, we just don't have the technology to be able to do that at this point. That's why like that can be debunked easily. I mean,
yeah,
like,
I don't.
In general, to process all speech for ad placement, that's what I'm saying.
That'd be one hell of a data center.
Exactly, not data. You're talking like
a bunch.
Countries worth of data centers at this point. Yeah, like it's not feasible for a company to do that, especially like even a company like Google can't accomplish something like that. They could parse text. Text is a different story, obviously. Like, it's a lot easier, so that's what they do, and they parse a lot of other information as you're browsing the web and stuff like that. There's a lot of things they can parse, but they're most likely, I can almost say guaranteed, not parsing your voice. Like, they're not parsing you talking about it.
Yeah, like, I'm not necessarily accusing them of that, but what I guess what I'm saying is like, isn't that better still? Like, isn't it better than seeing some random ad that like is totally unrelated to you? Like like sod. It's like, what? Like,
no, I'm of the thought process that I'm okay with them tracking me while I'm on the web and using that information to place ads because it provides a free website experience. As soon as that goes away, and I'm sure it will, or something will change, we will have to pay per website access. All the big websites will do great. All the smaller websites will die out. Like, that process will happen, in my opinion, in our lifetime, which is unfortunate. I think we should talk about this on either a separate web news or a separate segment. Because, there's a lot we can talk about with privacy, but like, essentially,
so it's a broad topic.
I agree with you. Yeah, it's a broad topic. I agree with you in this case where, like, I am a proponent of, like, as long as it's consentful, like, I consent personally, like, I'm consenting right now for websites to use my data and serve me ads. That's okay. I'm okay with that. But I think a lot of people are not, like, willfully consenting. Maybe I don't know. That's where the issue lies. Maybe you need to be more upfront, and that's the whole thing with the cookies. I don't know. Like, to bring it back to the cookies, that's, I guess, who it's for. It's for those people that don't consent and would rather have a more paid experience and would rather have like, their data not used and just no ads seen. Which is, I mean, like, can't control other people's thoughts. Like, it's fair enough, I guess, right? Like, we're not. I don't know if we're the majority or they're the majority. I'm not sure. But that's why I wanted to bring this up. But I just wanted to make sure that everyone in our audience knew about this cookie law. And if you are creating a site that does store cookies and does use personal information, make sure you're upfront with it right now. Hopefully, in the future, they will look into creating an easier solution for everyone. But for now, make sure that you follow it. That's kind of where I want to end it.
Yeah, because this like UX is obviously terrible. Like, of having like a pop-up is terrible. It's anti-consumer from the perspective of the website owner. It's pro-consumer in terms of the government trying to stop the flow of semi-personal data, personal or semi-personal. I don't know how in depth these things go. So I think it's a good gesture. I don't know if it's a good implementation, if that makes sense. I agree with them being like, okay, like, let's pump the brakes on this data collection thing. Because we had marketing data for years in which you could do market research, but this is like everyone puts so much data into their phone now, in their phone, their computer, their browser, whatever, that it'd be the same as like in the 70s somebody following you with a pen and paper. And like following you whenever you're in public, let's say it doesn't get super ridiculous where they're in your house, but like whenever you leave the house, they're like following you and they're like writing everything down. Like, what is he looking at? Is he looking at that billboard? Okay, he looks at billboards. Like seriously, oh, he looks at billboards, but he's in a nice car. Does he like cars, or did he inherit that? If he inherited it, that might mean he have money. Like,
yeah, that's essentially what it's doing. You're right.
Yeah, like it's literally like as if like somebody like a paparazzi, but just instead of taking pictures, they're just writing everything down. Like, what's he looking at? What's he doing? Why is he doing that? What time is it? What day is it now? Is it because it's raining? When it's raining, he likes soup. Okay, when it rains, like when we have this rather data, give him soup. Like seriously though, like that's a serious thing. Like a soup company would be like, fuck yeah, it's raining, give him soup.
Yep.
So I think it's a good thing that we need to like maybe pump the brakes a bit and be like, okay, whoa, like Jesus. I think it's also in the EU, like as a pro for the EU, I think it's a good idea to maybe let's calm down with the data collection. So I'm on their side with that. Just to analyze it. I don't want to stop it. And I like that they didn't stop it. I like that it's a pop-up and not a like, stop, fill this form out. You know what I mean? Because they could have did that.
Yep.
So I'll give them props for that. I think the UX is bad in terms of like, if I was making a UI and someone's like, but it's not a pop-up. Like, what? I do a what? I want this, like, and it comes back to kind of conclude our conversation before on Web News about those pop-ups that pop up and be like, sign up to our newsletter and stuff. They're annoying. And this is kind of in the same thing, except it's for something more serious. So that's my opinion on it. I don't know if you have any other details to share, but
no, I'm good. Let's
wrap it up.
Let these people go. Yeah.
So let us know if you tried Webflow or if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or whatever about this cookie law or anything else we've talked about. If you have any good website builders out there, let us know, because we're kind of experimenting with some of them here and there, so wouldn't mind hearing about your experiences with those. But thanks for listening, and make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on the platform of your choice. You can follow us on the socials via @HTML All the Things on Facebook and Instagram. We're @HTML Everything on Twitter. We are on Medium. We are on GitHub. Make sure you check out our Patreon, which is patreon.com/HTML All the Things. Check out the tiers. Give that a go. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform you are listening to this on. And we are signing off.